Good morning. Good morning in Brussels. I've seen one of our friends coming here on bike. Caroline, it was 2. She was really frozen. So winter is coming. So my daughter is already looking for the gifts from the Papa Noel. But before Papa Noel is Saint Nicholas. So she's very happy the season is starting. So our season today is about knowledge management, and how we make our decision process, better, wiser, on time, and so on. So I maybe will say a few words, how this journey started with the panel. The panel was established. There were few processes behind. In 2008, I think, or 9 was the Hungarian presidency when we started discussion about the health systems and how Commission can help with number of ideas around health systems, and one of the gap we define in member states in a number of discussions that we really don't have the place or people or expertise we can ask, for advice, as Commission, as member states. Even it was a moment the regions also asked for access to this kind of knowledge, and slowly we get to the moment that we decided to form this this expert panel, and is a moment now for us also to reflect today, since the first panel was set up 2012. What really we achieve and how this process works, and I really welcome today that you to discuss the do we really do good job, you as experts and we as a Commission to use your expertise in policy making or decision process. So for us, the next problem was also the how to get independence in this process, and how to make sure that we were able to identify this expertise and also find the right questions to the panel. For us also was very interesting, how the opinion will be formed. Today we have 18 opinions. They are generated on the questions we're able to address. I think this is maybe first one of idea I would like to have for discussion during the day. How we form the questions, and we have representatives of member states here today, and other communities, stakeholders. It would be good to know, if you will be in the seat I am sitting in the not today, but in Santerre, do you address any specific question to this expert panel? So let's see if you have this idea. We try to characterize this panel with a few headings. The first heading, I would say, it was multidisciplinarity. And this was one of the problems when we formed the Commission decision, how you define the areas of expertise. I can tell you, we were really trying to, it was no Google time, so we didn't Google, what relate to the healthcare. But as, also coming from my background of public health, I remember how difficult it is to define what is public health and define what is the expert knowledge needed to make the health system working better. I think even more difficult. So what we did, we put number of areas, territories of knowledge, but also we wanted from the beginning to have mixture of talents, coming from academia, coming from expertise of the clinical knowledge, expertise of management, policy making. So we found this is not only about the disciplines, but it's also about the way experts were formed, the knowledge. Because I think this will be most probably very interesting question. If you will form the future panels, what will be the talents and knowledge you like to get the best expertise possible? The second important area was independence, and since the beginning we make very clear this is not kind of is called by Commission, but is independent from the Commission. And I hope, Jan, as a chair, hopefully you will confirm that we never really came to the meeting and said to the expert, go to the right, go to the left, take this paper or report and use. You are always free to decide. And there were moments, I confess, this was appetite to come and say, guys, maybe you are wrong. Maybe you should reconsider your stuff. But I never opened door in this moment. I rather prefer that you decide yourself. But also what's happened, what was important, that you started to open yourself to the public debate. And we have also, this is maybe the third important point. You didn't work in the closed doors. You came to the moment of publication of your draft opinion, but then we started also this interactive live exchange here in Brussels, which I think was also often on internet live streaming, which allowed us to also get additional knowledge. And the third point of this was to get to the data, to the knowledge, to the best publications, and so on. And of course, in this area, we are dealing often with the publications. We know also, I think, I since first time in my life I met Martin McKee. I remember his dramatic speech in Valencia. I think it was most probably 91. When we are getting kind of experience in our life. So this time Martin said, comparing US kind of knowledge base based on the publications on the health service research and public health and European, I remember there was like a gradient with, I don't remember, 100 folds or whatever. Americans this time, they publish, they have a lot of already journals. In Europe, I don't think we have a journal. Journal of Public Health was formed later. So we are now in better shape. But of course, same time, many knowledge generated in the gray literature, in the reports. Okay, today it's easier to get them through internet, but also validation of data, validation of knowledge is the other critical point. So for today, we have 3 sessions. The first one is here. We're just starting with Jan and Paweł. The second will be the panel on the review the specific experience of the panel and share experience from members of the panel. And the final session will be about the lessons learned, and how we can better shape the next cycle of work. There will be possibility to ask questions to each session, and you will be asked to contribute to the debate through the question surveys on slido.do. You have there will be understand you can download this app from your mobiles, and we are using this in many meetings, and we have / expert panel in health, so it's EXPH, must be somewhere there, 2019. So please use it. It will help us with the debate. So now I can ask the chair, Jan, who is, I think, most experienced chair. But let me also, Jan, use this opportunity to thank you for your chairmanship, for your leadership, for your calmness, wise kind of way of dealing with often rough world of knowledge and individuals you are gathering in this process, and very much welcome in Brussels as well.
Thank you very much, Andre, for this very comprehensive introduction. I hope this functions. Yeah, it's working. That's fine. Welcome. On my behalf and on behalf of the panel members, and they are here in the front, and also the people that are working in the Commission in DG Santé with the panel. Very much welcome to this meeting. When you're listening to people when they arrived, they said, well, this is a kind of different meeting. And it's about a difficult point, this interaction between stakeholders, the scientific world, the policy world, and then, well, all the agents that are interacting with this. And So everybody said we look forward. So there are a lot of questions. We hope this day will help to answer the question, but we are sure that questions will be left at the end of this day. It is a process that we are ongoing. I thank you for being here in such a great number and also in such a diverse configuration and variety. As you will see, there are participants from all kinds of groups, and we reflected that also in the speakers, composition of the speakers panel. There are people representing member states, all kinds of stakeholders, academia, industry, patients, consumers, you name it. Of course, EU level is here, but national level, regional level are also here, and we know how important they are. Permanent representatives and other stakeholders are all here in this meeting, and we are very happy that they invest time to have this interaction with us. Because for the panel, it's so important to know that you don't work in a vacuum, that you continuously are receptive to the questions, the issues that live in the healthcare systems in the different member states in the European Union. And at the same time that you have this idea what will be the future, what will be the innovations. And some of our documents really try to see what could be the answers to the upcoming questions due to innovations like technology, the changing role of the patient, probably the most disruptive innovation in healthcare in the last 20 years. So all these things that come on the agenda, we try to give answers to that. And we do that with the resources we have. And of course, the first resources is this 14 people that make the panel. I think that is really the richness of this is this interdisciplinarity. Andre already said it is a very rich composition, but it's also a challenge. And increasingly, we learned to have not only an interdisciplinary approach, but to use a transdisciplinary approach, so that we know when somebody with a background of health economics gives his view, that we as clinicians or as policymakers, we integrate this vision in our own response, in our own contribution in the dialogue. And then you come to a kind of transdisciplinarity that I think is a very important point. And as a group, we made that process. It was a learning journey, but we made that process, and more, you see clinicians taking a health economics view when they formulate their points of view, or a more organizational point of view, and so on, and vice versa. I think that that's very important to create this kind of new knowledge that comes out of this transdisciplinary approach. And of course, as already said, for the panel, the independence was very important, and I can only affirm very clearly that at no moment in time during the 6 years that I've chaired this group, there was a kind of indication or a phone call in the middle of the night or the day saying, you know, Jan, it would be better if... No, that never happened. And I think that this also is important because it creates a relationship of mutual trust and respect. That does not mean that, that we were not interested in the opinions that were in the different groups and organizational components of the European Commission. Of course we are interested, and we try to integrate that, but we try also to have our independence. And of course, yes, it were very challenging years, but it was a wonderful journey. It was a wonderful journey to walk with the team and to learn to formulate and to be responsive to the needs. And so if you look at the list of the opinions, I think that in the first 6 years, these 18 opinions reflect a little bit important issues that were at stake and that will be at stake for the future of healthcare. So thank you very much for this introduction, this opportunity, and all the support we received from the Commission during all this time.
Thank you, Jan. So let's now move to Paweł Świeboda. He is not a member of the expert panel, but Paweł is Vice Director of the European Political Strategy Centers, the Commission think tank, and he will tell us, you know, how this expertise of many others, can be incorporated into the policy making to the Commission, because you have spent time at the top of the house, and you tell us how evidence is built into policy making.
Right, thank you so much, Andrzej and Jan, and warm congratulations for the work of the expert panel. First of all, I've been always impressed by what you have put out. So, given that this is the opening session, I was asked to take the eagle's eye, and I've had the distinct privilege of sitting in an eagle's nest for the past 5 years, because the EPSC is an advisory service to the President of the European Commission. So we do medium to long-term policy advice directly to the President. And I would like to share with you a few thoughts about evidence-based policy and its prospects. And I would say at the outset that, to me, the European Union is a temple of evidence-based policy. I mean, when you look around the world, there is no other place like ourselves which puts evidence-based policy at the heart of what happens, at the heart of what we do. So this is extremely precious in itself, and I think we need to take good care of it. But evidence-based policy is both facing a lot of headwinds, and it's facing a huge promise in the years to come. The headwinds are numerous. I think they come from the complexity of policy. I mean, as scientists, you're used to complexity, but policymakers are not necessarily with that mindset. They struggle. Then there is partisanship and polarization in the society at large, which is not helping. There is a battle for ownership of evidence. It's more and more the case that when you put out evidence, someone else puts a rival proposition, and that's relatively new. I mean, there was always fertile debate inside science, but not to the extent of shooting from the hip with an alternative version of the facts. There is battle for trust, because studies show that people consider the opinion of their peers to be as valid as the opinion of experts. I mean, that's new, at least after Enlightenment. Maybe if we go further back, it's not that new, but in modern times, this is new. And then there is something, I would say, much more existential, namely there is a battle for truth and battle over the future of progress. And to be honest, I have never expected, at least in my lifetime, this to resurface, namely people putting out questions whether scientific progress is still what we desire. And I mean, it's not a mainstream proposition, but it's gaining ground around the corners, and it cannot be ignored either. But I said these are headwinds, because the nature of headwinds is that they slow you down, but they don't change your direction. And I think the promise is still much greater than that, and it has to do with the exhilarating pace of technological and scientific advance, and it has to do with our access to data, which allows to both look at the aggregate and to look at the granular. And I would say both are equally important, because the aggregate helps us to deal with the big global challenges. I mean, climate change comes to mind, obviously, at the first place. But granular helps us to make sure that policy becomes more customized. And I think that's also the future that we will need to, given the scarcity of resources, we will need to make sure that we find an adequate answer to people's individual needs. And I think customization is really an extremely important avenue for the future of policy. So at the EPSC, we were, as I said, tasked with the strategic evidence-based policy and forward-looking policy advice as well. But we're also given this mission to innovate and disrupt, because of course, the Commission has its traditional streams of work, but our task was to step aside and look. I mean, does it all make sense? Is there something that we are missing out in the process? And then what is there on the horizon that we are perhaps not addressing sufficiently? And there have been 4 lessons of that which I would like to share with you briefly. The first one is that evidence needs to be both quantitative and qualitative. Needs to be multidisciplinary and contextual. Philosopher Philip Goff has written recently a book called Galileo's Error, which I would strongly recommend to you. And he argues that physical science works with purely quantitative vocabulary, whereas consciousness is essentially a qualitative phenomenon. It's about the smell of coffee, it's about the taste of chocolate, and you can't capture quality with purely quantitative vocabulary. And he calls this book Galileo's Error because he traces this dedication to quantitative science back to Galileo. And he argues for bringing the qualitative more strongly into the equation. And I think that's right. It is facts and their qualities which make for the music, make for the sound. And in our work, we have tried to keep that in mind, bringing in both angles of the equation, and also reaching out beyond Brussels to limit the groupthink, which, in terms of the contextual element, is extremely important. The EU is a diverse place. We have unity in diversity. Almost written into our main motto. And in going forward in regulating artificial intelligence, especially the contextual dimension will become more rather than less important. The second lesson has been that communication is not an afterthought, but should be built into policy advice. So it's about knowledge translation. It's about transforming evidence and data into usable and understandable messages to support policy design. So in our work, we have put a lot of attention to storytelling, to visualization, to make sure that evidence carries a message. The third lesson has been to create safe space for ideas, debate, and learning. In other words, for experimentation. And it's been an uphill struggle to bring more experimentation into policy design. When you look at our regulatory work, the better regulation paradigm has been at the forefront. But attempts to insert more experimentation have been immensely difficult. Some member states have moved further. The Netherlands, for example, uses experimentation in its policy design much more than anybody else, I would dare to say. But at the EU level, it's complicated. Also because now, how do you experiment with 28 different member states at the same time? Complicated but necessary. Lesson 4 has been about helping to prepare for the future and the importance of strategic foresight. We will now have Vice President of the European Commission for strategic foresight. I think we claim at least part of the credit for that because we've worked on foresight for the last five years. And foresight is not about predicting the future. Obviously, it's about preparing for it. It's about helping people to put the necessary things in place so that we are prepared. So to sum up, I would say that that we are in the course of this somewhat existential struggle that evidence-based policy is involved in, struggle for relevance. And I think in that struggle, evidence-based policy needs to be seen as solving real problems. There is need for more evidence, but there is also necessity for that evidence to have more relevance. It needs to be more transparent, meaning that we need to be more open about the data and the models that are being used, and there has to be more space for experimentation, for testing, learning, and adapting. So the jury is out, but I think if these conditions are met, and in spite of the headwinds, we might be in for another golden age of evidence-based policy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paweł. We have a few minutes left, 3, for maybe one, 2 questions to Paweł, if you would like to get comments. Okay, so you need some warm-up. Coffee was too light. Okay, so, yep, please. You have mic, I think, next to you. Used to be. Oh, sorry, used to be. Sorry, this is a different room.
Out of interest, being a member of the expert panel, can you say a little bit about how our work may or may not have been instrumental to your own ambitions?
Can you repeat the question? Yeah, you speak on screen.
Yeah, there are more microphones I think in the seats, but this should work.
Out of curiosity, being a member of the expert panel, I was just wondering, could you tell us a little bit about how our work as a panel may or may not have been instrumental to the work of your policy center?
I mean, our task has really been to cover the entire policy territory, so that's a huge space, and to select what the president needs to know and what is relevant for this macro level. So what we would always do is to look into the work of panels like yours and to extract what is relevant for the macro political level, and that is always a hit and miss type of exercise, because we do our best, but we are a small team, so we cannot guarantee that everything will be filtered through in the right fashion. But we have made a huge effort, and the team has really looked deeply into the work you are doing, again, to extract issues which are of relevance to the broader EU political policy agenda, and then to formulate recommendations for the future as well, for each ongoing work program, because that has been our task. Not dwell in detail about the different policy recommendations, but more extract what is relevant for the Commission's work program and what needs to happen at this strategic level. And I'm sure the DG itself has benefited immensely more from this work. What we have benefited from is these macro policy recommendations.
The example would be the access to which was one of critical story which finally found a place in the social pillar. So this would be example which I can pick out, because of course it works also this way, that we are pushing the evidence through the system, and the top somehow is getting. And the other example will be the number of staff, because Paweł mentioned something which I always found as important, turning to the numbers into the communication, knowledge, understanding, was the whole process of state of health, when finally we're able to show the graphics or the explain things to the public. I remember my meeting with journalists in Warsaw, and they said, finally, the first, it was a funny question, it's so small. It's so small. They couldn't understand, how commissioners produce such small document. We can, but of course, it's important also small, and it is also something I think we discuss in panel, how to make communication better. Last question, and we close panel. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I'm George Griffin. I'm president of the Federation of European Academies of Medicine. I thought your introduction was beautiful. One thing I would say about evidence, and I'm a physician who practices evidence-based medicine, is evidence always changes. And we have to be aware of trends in change. So, for example, in oncology, 5 years ago, when your committee started, the use of antibodies in the treatment of cancer was hardly started. Now, this is, of course, very, very predominant. The cost implications of that for healthcare systems are great. So the evidence for treatment changes and has implications throughout the system, not just in terms of patient care, but in terms of cost, in terms of the community. And so you will see later on, I'm going to talk about surveillance after decisions have been made based on evidence, to say we must watch out and be aware that evidence will change, and it may need to change at a political level as well, of course.
Thank you very much for those comments. So thank you very much for this opening. So wish you a very good day, and I'm sorry I cannot stay with you, but unfortunately my father is suddenly in the hospital, and I have tried to rescue him in the local healthcare system. Oh, he's fine, you know. Surprisingly, the health system is working. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank Andre for being with us in these difficult times. So I'm now going to bring you to the session on challenging interactions, science and policy making. And one of the speakers already introduced himself, George Griffin, so you can take the place here. Then we have Professor Bussemaker, who is going to join the panel. And finally, we have Professor Kasim Chaudhry, that is also going to join us. Take care, take care. So, we start with three people with quite different backgrounds that will help us to walk a little bit to answer the question, how can expert advice provide a sound basis for policy making? Because you have the research, we have the conclusion from research that leads to evidence, and then there are some experts that make an advice, and then that should be translated into policy. And then finally the aim is that the health of the citizen improves. And that's a very long journey. So we are going to reflect from three perspectives on this question, taking into account the European context, looking how is this done, what are positive experiences, what can we learn for the future. And first of all, I want to introduce to you Professor Jet Bussemaker. She is actually president of the Dutch Council for Health and Society. But if I'm well informed, you also have been at the other side. Yes? For a long time. For a long time. Maybe just explain yourself and go ahead.
I have a mic. Yeah. I'm Jet Bussemaker. I'm now the president of the Council of Healthcare and Society in the Netherlands. I'm professor at Leiden University on policy, science and societal impact. I was, till 2 years ago, the Minister of Education, Science and Culture. Before I was at the board of the University of Amsterdam, and I was also the State Secretary of Healthcare and Wellbeing. And I've been a member of parliament for a long time as well in the Netherlands. So, you know, I'm both a politician and an academic. So that's sometimes a difficult, but also sometimes a very fruitful combination.
So we could not have someone who is better placed and has been placed at the different sides, just to give you insights, looking at what you learned and what you think is important from both perspectives, and especially also in your actual function as president of the Dutch Council for Health and Society.
Yeah, you know, what I learned during my years in politics and also in position in academia is that the way we think about science and knowledge has changed dramatically. And so also the way you have to interact, whether as a scientist or as the president of a council or as a minister, is changed dramatically as well.
And can you just help us to understand what for you are the main changes that you see?
Yeah, I think some of them were already mentioned because, you know, there is no authority of institutions anymore. Being a minister, it's not that if you say how you want to improve the healthcare of your population, people think, okay, this is automatically a good idea. It's disputed everywhere. It's disputed in parliament, but it's disputed by sometimes by scientists and by politicians who are saying that science is just another meaning. We have the digital information, which is difficult to control. You have fake news. You have citizens, which in fact it's very good, are much more at the forefront, are much more autonomous than they were before. So they have their own ideas. So they don't listen by definition to you. So maybe I can give you an example from my experience as a State Secretary of Health. A positive one and a negative one.
Yeah.
A positive one was a program. I started the national program on elderly care. It was already in 2008. It was a program for 3 years, but it longed more than 10 years because it was very successful. And it was very successful because it was the first program ever which was a combination of co-creation with the elderly themselves. So it was a form of what we now call citizen science. We did not use the term by then, but nowadays we should call it citizen science. So they were very much involved. It was not only the evidence-based from research, but also the narrative and the experiences of the elderly themselves. And then you see that you have to use transdisciplinary approaches and so on. But we also included science in a way that we wanted to study what we were doing. So we wanted to study the policy effects. And that was very successful. Another thing that was not very successful was a campaign for vaccination for cervical cancer by women. So we had to vaccinate young girls at the age of 12. All the evidence, medical evidence, said that it was very necessary to do that. So I started a campaign and I asked one of the advisory institutes in the Netherlands, the RIVM, to send their best knowledge, their best scientists to explain why this was necessary. And they did. And they did a very, very good job. But people didn't believe it. That just became digital communities. And I was shocked by then. And they just started to, you know, the peer review Pavel just mentioned. So the whole vaccination campaign wasn't a big success because it was evidence-based medical information, but it was not received. And I think we forgot the context in which the information came to people. And that's something I really learned. And as a Minister of Education and Science, I tried to do it another way with another project, which I'm quite proud of. It's the Dutch Science Agenda. And I know some other countries are very much interested in it. We try to make an agenda about the future issues of science, not by the department only, not with scientists only, but again with citizen science. We asked the whole Dutch population, what are the questions that bother you? What are the issues you think we should get an answer on? And then there were thousands of questions, and researchers, scientists started to recollect them. What are indeed questions that we can answer from a scientific perspective? How can we combine some of these questions? And so we made some routes for important societal questions, and for example, about healthcare research and prevention. How do we act on with prevention? I think a very important issue, but also personalized medicine, resilient societies for all. So that were some of the topics that came out, the whole procedure, but we try to collect and reframe them in relation to other issues. For example, in combination with technology or sustainability. And that's a new way of making your science agenda. And although we now need much more money, that's the new problem. the whole process of making such an agenda is, for me, is an example of a way I like to work and to cope with all these challenges. And then, whether you are a politician or you are a scientist or you are, as I am, a president of the Council of Healthcare and Society, so we are now making our working program at the Council, and we work again with co-creation, with trying to knowing the crowd. We have a public ranking the topics where people can go to a website and say what they think is important. And we try to change our process by not only making the moment of presenting an advice very important, but the whole process before, the process of co-creation, of discussing topics with people, with organizations, not only the stakeholders who represent others, who represent others, who represent others, but people, really the professionals or the citizens that have the real experience. And on the other hand, to do more after the presentation of an advice, to think about the impact of it and to organize all over the country discussions, digital communities and so on.
Thank you very much.
So it's a new way of reframing. Yeah.
In one of our opinions, the panel wrote that you need different types of evidence. You have medical evidence, you have contextual evidence, and you have policy evidence. And if I listen to you, this seems to be in practice what you are doing.
I'm trying to do. I brought one advice, although unfortunately it's only on Dutch, but we have an English summary on the website. It's about evidence-based medicine, and it's a plea not only not for evidence, but to look more to context-based practice instead of evidence-based practice. And this, this report is about practice in care, healthcare, but I would say the same conclusion might apply to policy making. So I would change the title of the conference. So it should not only be about evidence-based policy making, but about contextualizing in policy making. That is very, very important, and that brings a lot of things I said together, I think.
Thank you very much for this challenging introduction. And I think you paved the way already for the second approach, because later on we are going to dialogue with the public after the 3 introductions with Professor Griffith. You are the president of the Federation of European Academies of Medicine. So this is the academic view. You've got the floor for just a short introduction as well.
I'd like to be able to switch the screen, actually, which doesn't seem to work on this.
It's over there. It's over there.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here and part of this scheme. One of the joys, of course, of our profession is meeting like-minded people. And I met Jan earlier on, and we just talked the same language straight away. And the idea was that all of the things we are talking about today are, in fact, a continuum. And it should be smooth. And what we have done in the past is build ourselves into silos which don't communicate properly. And that's one of the themes that I'd like you to see from this brief talk that I'm going to give. Now, you will see from the list of things that I do that this reflects my own career progression. Science, both basic, clinical and clinical trials, clinical practice in a major hospital in London, St George's, and now being on the board of Public Health England, trying to frame the new development of what is called Public Health England. So this gives you an idea of my deep, deep context, continuum and get rid of barriers. Now, evidence-based medicine, we've heard a lot about this, but just to remind you of simple facts, that evidence-based medicine is absolutely crucial now for all aspects of healthcare. It enables treatment efficacy and, very important, safety. At the end, of course, you have to have cost effectiveness, And this is again reflected as a continuum from the individual patient to the community. And this is crucial for healthcare. We have to think of the individual, but we must think of that individual within a community and within the world, of course. And all of this leads to personalized medicine. What happens when we as individuals get ill? How are we looked after within this healthcare system? Research, as you'll see, and particularly at the end, is absolutely crucial. And as I said earlier on, things change, evidence changes, and surveillance is very important to see just what is happening. So using this change in evidence, we can change policy. What we really need as part of this continuum are robust and meaningful partnerships. And this, of course, involves communication, but it involves involvement, not just committees sitting down and then going away. Real involvement. We see this in our hospital practice. How many hospital managers come onto the wards to see what is really happening? Nil point is the answer very often. And it's so simple. And when they do that, they realize how crucial their policy making is to the management of healthcare. And what I've tried to do in my own department, which has 50 people, both clinicians and basic scientists, is to have the context of enabling rather than managing. And by enabling, that means enabling people to reach their full potential in the context of what they are doing. And it's difficult to do that, of course, because sometimes things go wrong. And that's when you do have to manage. So enabling and managing are part, again, of a continuum. But enabling must be the dominant feature, in my view. Now, I've been asked to talk about the scientific input. And this is, again, multi-compartment. It goes from basic medical science. I mentioned already oncological treatments and the use of antibodies. It goes through to industry. And we must have that because it's now impossible for academia or government to fund the $1 billion to produce a new drug. And this has to be a partnership between academia, industry, but having everyone respecting each other. Community surveillance is very, very important. What happens when vaccination figures fall? We know. Measles. We have deaths from measles in Europe. We have the UK losing its recognition as a measles-free area because our measles vaccination rate has gone down, as in the rest of Europe. So we must have surveillance to know what's happening, and does that explain what we see? And then, of course, at the end of the day, or even at the beginning of the day as well, you have to have cost analysis. What does this cost to a country? Can that country and can that community afford that? Now, I was specifically asked to talk about the role of academies. And I'm going to give you some examples now of how this might work and how it would help in the context of the policy making that we've been talking about. Well, the first thing is, as the Federation of European Academies of Medicine, you will see at the bottom there, we have 5 European academic networks who work together. And what this gives is a whole range of activities from engineering to medicine to social sciences, and they can be called on at any time through this consortium. Now, at the top there, you'll see in big letters, SAPIR. This stands for Scientific Advice for Policy for Europe. And this was an idea of Commissioner Moedas when he came in some 5.5 years ago. And he said, if academies can get together, they can be given topics that they can look at in great detail and produce documents. These documents are evidence. They are not policy. The document goes to the Commission and the Commission takes out what it can do and what it thinks is important. So, for example, from FIM, I have led a group looking at and just producing a document literally in the last month, which has been sent to the Commission, called Transforming Aging. And all of us in this room know what this means to the Union. It means a massive proportion of over 80s throughout European countries. And how will that affect healthcare? And how do we prepare people for this increasing age? So we have just produced this document, and there are three main recommendations. One is get rid of ageism. We shouldn't regard old people as hopeless and useless and just ignore them. Second is to prepare people for aging, and this means get people young and keep them fit as they develop. Diabetes, a terrible problem in Europe at the moment, type 2 diabetes, because of obesity. And the third one, which links, is education. Educate people right from primary school age through their life course. And don't be afraid to give advice. It is so important. And I hope those of you in this audience who are involved in aging and looking at this throughput of people in Europe will see this. It's online now, this document. So basically, in conclusion, academies work together in Europe, and they cover many, many specialties, from straightforward clinical medicine through to engineering, artificial intelligence, and so on. And we would be very pleased to help in this context.
Thank you very much, Professor Privet. And we have now a third contributor, that is Professor Kasim Chaudhry. He is the chair of the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety, advising European Commission. So, and he will bring in the consumer perspective.
Can I have
and he needs to click.
the clickers? No, I need that. Okay. Sorry for my talk.
So also for you, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm here to represent the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety, but I'm based in University of Chester in the UK. But my background is in UK's Food and Environment Research Agency for much of my career. My talk will be on actually practical ways how we deal with the evidence, how we produce evidence-based scientific advice, how it interacts with policy, what are the challenges, and how we are dealing with them. So if I make a start, I hope it works. Perfect. So I'm going to briefly describe how the evidence-based scientific advice is working at the moment, and how it is helping the policy in terms of protecting consumer health from consumer products. As we know, there are a variety of them. And then examples of what kind of challenges we have faced, and how we have managed to tackle it. A very, very brief introduction. SCCS, Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety, sits in Luxembourg, and it's an independent committee of the European Commission for assessing safety of non-food consumer products, mainly cosmetics, personal care products, textiles, toys, tattoos, and various household products. 15 members, experts in a variety of expertise: chemistry, toxicology, exposure assessment, medicine, dermatology, allergy, risk assessment. And we develop scientific advice to the Commission, and also we develop guidance for the applicants. First of all, we work on 3 or 4 principles. Independence we keep to very heart of our work, scientific excellence, transparency, and openness. So we are a panel of top independent experts, and they are selected from a huge pool who apply at every renewal, and they are selected for their excellence in respective fields. All their CVs and DOIs, declaration of interest, are freely accessible on the web, so we make it very clear that's who they are, so that there is no conflict of interest on any part. Then transparent evidence-based evaluation of dossiers which companies submit. And then we also collect evidence from all available sources. And then evidence is made available for free access. So again, this is one of our way of working, except where data are confidential and it is requested by the company. And then the process goes as that we do not just develop opinions and publish it. We publish a draft opinion and give a commenting period to allow all interested parties to come up with questions and comments. And believe me, we receive hundreds of comments on every opinion, very contentious ones. And then each and every comment is replied. And if they are right and we are wrong, then we amend our opinion and finally publish the opinion. Then all the opinions, mandates, meetings, consultations, list of members, everything goes onto the web for free access. So this is the way we have developed a trust with our stakeholders, that the whole process is very transparent, independent, and based on scientific excellence. We also publish fact sheets for general public, where very complicated topics, we translate them into very simple, understandable language, just 1 page or 2 page documents, and they are freely available as well. As a result of that, our opinions are very much highly regarded within Europe and in other jurisdictions. We routinely receive commendations from other jurisdictions, FDA, Health Canada, Japan, and Brazil, and others, that they are following our developments all the time, and they actually wait when the SCCS opinions are coming out. What it does is that this stringent process actually not only ensures that consumer health is protected, but also it gives industry credence that they can take a credit that their products have gone through very stringent safety assessment, and hence they are very well regarded. So every industry acknowledges that very openly, that because of the process, they don't like the process at some stage, especially when the opinion is not in their product's favor. But they acknowledge that as a result of that, their products have a very high regard around the world. As I mentioned, we publish a variety of fact sheets, very simple, very readable, and they are all available on the website. How it affects policy, because as a result of our advice, then Commission may place an ingredient on one of the annexes. Either it is prohibited, you cannot use it, or it is restricted, it can be used with certain limits, what the level can be used, or it is allowed under various categories. So the companies are then very clear what they can use and what they cannot use. We have had lots of ongoing challenges, CMR substances, allergens and impurities like mercury and a variety of other things. And new topics are emerging, endocrine disruptors and other issues. But on top of that, we have lots of new challenges. And new challenges normally we face when there is new scientific advancement, new materials, new processes, new questions arise, or emergence of new technologies. An example is nanotechnology. In the next slide, I will say a bit more on that. Or there are other policy drivers apart from scientific advice. There are political, as it was discussed before my talk, economic, political. And then sometimes there is a change in policy which affects our work, because then example is the ban on animal testing for cosmetics. And suddenly you cannot have recourse to the data we used to use in our assessments. So I will give you just a couple of examples. One example is a technology emerging and stepping ahead of the regulation, and a regulation had to catch up. And example is nanotechnology. And this is new form of materials, very, very small particles in the range of 1 to 100 nanometers. Their properties, behaviors, and potential effects are can be very different from normal forms of chemicals. And concern is that if these smallest particles go into the body, they will not stay in one place. They will probably end up in various organs. And because they are insoluble and some are biopersistent, what do they do in the body? And this is a concern. And safety data on chemical forms, usually you can extrapolate in chemical to chemical. It is not possible for nanomaterials because their properties, their behavior is very, very different. Hence, there is very little database to base your judgment on. And none of the methods to actually get more data are validated for nanomaterials. They are so new. It will take years and years and maybe decades before we have those kind of things. And then, but the catch is that numerous products are already on the market, and many more are waiting to be on the market. And the guidance was missing. There was no guidance for industry what kind of data to produce for these materials and how. How we tackle this challenge? We formed a specific working group to look into all available evidence, apply expert judgment, consultations, and all that. And we developed our nano guidance in 2012. And we then agreed that, okay, while validated methods are not available, it may take several decades, we will accept data from mainstream methods that can be shown to be scientifically valid, not even if they have not gone through proper validation. And then we had to assess a number of dossiers, and we produced our opinions. And these still have been the very first assessments of nanomaterials in any regulatory jurisdiction in the world. And this is very much appreciated by people everywhere. And then gaps in scientific assessments, as we did assess all those dossiers, we had more and more experience of what the gaps are, what the issues are. So we then updated and revised our guidance, which is published last month, October 2019. Second example.
May I suggest that we stick to that example, or can you finish in 1 minute?
I will finish in 1 minute.
Okay, fine.
The other example is challenges arising from policy stepping ahead of the available technology. And this is a ban on animal testing. We used to have data historically from animal tests, and suddenly we do not have recourse to that. And then some in vitro methods are available, other methods are not validated, and they only give pieces of evidence. And how we dealt with that? We then looked into how those pieces of evidence from a variety of alternative methods can be put together in a weight of evidence, and how we can accept it. So, and then at the moment, companies are still using historic animal data, and slowly alternative method data have started to come in. So this is a positive way forward. And this is my summary, that evidence-based scientific advice, if it is built on independence, scientific excellence, transparency, and openness, it works, at least in our case. New challenges arise because either policy or scientific developments step ahead of the other. And if, again, coming back to the point, if we have a proactive approach to horizon scanning and seeing what is coming and being prepared for that, that would be very helpful. Sorry if I took more time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the 3 speakers. And I think they gave us a lot of food for thought with 3 different approaches, but they converge to, I think, the same kind of issues. So I would first invite the audience to come up with some questions, and then I will please indicate who you are, what your background is, and to whom you want to address the question, please. Yes, please. And you can find the microphone in your armchair, if everything goes well.
Good morning. Paul Barish from the U.S. Professor Busemakar, I enjoyed your talk very much. You focused a lot on context and culture. In the implementation gap that we're seeing in quality and safety, culture and context are mostly ignored. And the question is, given the gap and how we know policy needs to be driven, how do you get hospitals to actually focus on the role of culture and context in driving engagement and change?
So please take up this question.
Let me see if I understand your question correctly. You want me to answer the question whether hospitals are dealing with the gap between what or whom?
Given your focus on context to drive policy making, how do you make sure the people that drive operational services, hospital CEO, boards, directors, chairmen of departments, how do they actually use context and culture to actually improve care?
Okay, that's a very good question.
Yes.
There are some examples. I can't say that in my country that this is already implemented and is daily practice by all of them. But there are some examples, and also some of my colleagues, I'm professor at Leiden University Medical Center, that, you know, they pay much more attention to contextualization than they did before. Before they were using with evidence-based research, evidence-based consultation, and they didn't see results. And then they thought, if we really want to change diabetes, for example, which indeed is a huge problem, we have to start from another perspective. We have to listen to the patient. And, you know, we have to see the person behind the patient. So, but that's another way of dealing what I'm teaching students. You really have to work in another way. And also, you are not the authority. You was in the past. You have to listen. You have to listen, and I think listening, especially in the medical profession, but also in other professions, also in politics, I have to admit, it's not very well developed. So it should start with listening to what is the person, in what context, what drives him or she to change daily habits, what is important for a person in their daily life to change their the way they live, the way they eat, or whatever. So, you know, that there is a lot of discussion about this topic, but I can't say that this is daily practice for all of us.
Okay, Professor Griffith, you want to also comment on this?
Well, that's a really, really important question. The first thing I would say is it depends on the country in which you're in and the context of the healthcare. Now, I've worked in Boston, Michigan, and Washington. The American healthcare system is very different from the UK healthcare system. We have a national health service which is paid for by the government. In the States, of course, you have very much more an individualized system, which, to put it bluntly, could be aimed at profit rather than healthcare. So my own view is, in order to rationalize this, there should be some way of saying what is best for healthcare for the individual and the community, and then what cost can be given to that to provide that system. Now, that is difficult depending on which country that you're in. An example in the UK would be kidney transplantation. Not all hospitals need to do kidney transplantation because it's complex. You need a lot of laboratory tests to make sure people are safe. So smaller hospitals, which can do very well looking after, let's just call it routine medicine, can do that. So the health service says, you, St. George's, my own 1,000-bed hospital, will be a transplant and a trauma centre for this area of London covering 5 million people. A local hospital nearby, Kingston Hospital, does not do that, but it provides healthcare of a different nature. So really, I think what I'm saying is hospitals have to talk to each other and decide what they should do. Now, making that happen, perhaps in the American system, is much more difficult than in the public health service system.
Thank you for this comment and for this explanation. Are there other questions from the audience? And in the meantime, I would like to invite you to technically join the Slido.com, because you will be confronted with a question in the forthcoming minutes. So, but first we have time for another question, other reflection. From the audience? I see 1, 2, 3 on the same road. Yeah, let's start with the lady in the middle and then go to the man over there and then you. But short questions and short answers, and make clear who you are, what your background is, and you can find your microphone somewhere in your armchair if you do some explorative research.
Then you have to push
And don't forget to push the button. Always push the button.
Well, this is collaborative work,
Okay,
for
fine.
sure. And I think many of you, I mean, several of you mentioned this issue of independence and transparency as some of the crucial principles for expert panels or for experts to interact. You also mentioned, and at least two of the speakers mentioned the need to involve stakeholders, and not only patients, but industry. And in this part, I think a lot of the problems come in the details. If you could maybe very quickly share your experience in involving industry and at the same time dealing with transparency. And the issue that you mentioned related to consumer safety was the fact that sometimes there is information that is confidential, and in many times that is information that is needed to know for the public to gauge whether this is a risk that should be taken or not.
Yes. Is there one of the two other question people that is related to the question the lady formulated? Different areas? Okay. Then first we go to that one.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, it's a very delicate balance where you have all stakeholders' views, because obviously industry, not being any prejudice against their struggle to save their products, they will try to save their products and say that these are safe. But when we do public consultation, we not only invite industry, but all academia, all researchers, government institutions, state, member state representatives, any member of public can write to us in response to that. And there is normally a 3-month window when they can submit those comments. And then we reply each and every comment, assessing on the basis of evidence that is in front of us. So not going with the impulse and saying, because of this stakeholder says this or the other says the other way, saying that this is what the evidence says, and hence your comment is related or not related. Where it makes some sense and it changes our opinion, we do change our opinion accordingly. To answer that, if the data are confidential and how to do that, there is a legal then point, and not much we can do, except to reflect that public should have confidence that a panel of experts has seen that data, and what they have reflected in their summary should satisfy the public. But there are legal points which I cannot comment.
Thank you very much. Can I have your question quickly now?
Hi there. My name's James from the European Dental Students Association. You talked a lot about context in policy making, but I wondered how you deal with this context when, across Europe and even within member states, the context is so different between people. Thank you.
Yes, please.
I think the discussion we just had about the contextualization of the American healthcare system, the British healthcare system, and I would add the Dutch healthcare system, which is more social insurance based, but also has parts of the national healthcare system. That is very, very important to take into account. That is a very simple form of contextualization. But it also, I'm working on a big project on healthcare issues in the city of The Hague. It's one of the most segregated cities in my country. It makes a lot of difference in what kind of village or neighborhood you are working. So you really have to contextualize. You can talk about prevention of healthcare, and you have to say people, they have to smoke less. But if people have very big problems, they have no income, or they have difficulties to find a house, they have a lot of stress, then just telling them that they have to stop smoking does not make any change. So if you take, although it's evidence-based that smoking is bad for them, so if you contextualize and you think about what is your problem, and now we have very good examples with people who have very severe healthcare problems because they had a lot of stress by financial problems. And now we find in insurance a company who said, okay, I want to invest in managing the financial problems of this particular population, because that will help them to get a better health. And so that's a way of contextualization. And not doing the same for everyone, but thinking more in terms of populations and making the difference for patients and clients, and not one size fits all, which is normally based on evidence-based medicine, is the middle person and one size fits all solutions. So
thank you very much.
Just two examples.
That's a very good illustration of the importance of social determinants and contextualizing. And of course also political determinants and other determinants play the role and may affect the way our messages should be formulated. Last short question, and then we go to the voting process.
Thank you. My name is Tuche Schmidt from the Observatory. Thank you very much for the insights. I have a particular question to Professor Bussemaker. You talk about the citizen science, and you also said that you have a website in order to get the opinions of the citizens. How can you be sure that that there is no conflict of interest, so that they are really the citizens and not the private companies, let's say?
Yeah, good question.
Thanks.
So, you know, it should not be, we do not say what the citizens say as is the authority, and we just take it for granted. As a minister or a professor or whoever does not have the authority we maybe once had, also the citizens is one way to collect your data. And so what we did, for example, with the council now making our working agenda, is to have a survey which people can just sign, ranking the topics, what they find important. We had a lot of people told us who they are, so most are welfare or healthcare professionals, but maybe it might also be people with a private interest. So, you know, we cannot exclude it. But that's not the only way. We also organized meetings with stakeholders, with citizens, for example, with special programs, with migrants, with people living in poverty, with a lot of healthcare. And so we know that are real people. And so they also have the narrative. And of course we use material from academia. So it's the combination, and it's more about co-creation to take into account what people think is important, so that your conclusions of your research, you can get back and forward with them, and so that they understand where you come from. And then I agree with you, it should be always open source. So that people can verify your conclusions as well. So it's not one; it's a whole process. It's not only one box to tick.
Thank you very much. If everything goes well, you will now be invited to vote on 4 different topics, and if you find that they are important, you tick them, and you may tick more than one. You can go to Slido, www.slido.com, and then you should now be in this active poll. And if you, these are the 4 statements. What are the main obstacles to evidence-based policy making is the question. And the first alternative is decision makers are not receptive and lack knowledge. The evidence is not communicated well is the second alternative. And then the evidence is not available in time and or not relevant is the third alternative. So using the Slido, you can give your support to one or more of those issues, and then the panel will have 1 minute each to give the comments on the result. So we take some time so that everybody can. So we will go over 100% because you can vote for more than one alternative. So. Okay. Good. Well, what we see is that there is adherence to decision makers are not receptive and lack knowledge. That's a very important one. On second place, the evidence is not communicated well. And then also, and that's interesting, The least one is the evidence is not available in time and or relevant. May I first ask Professor Griffith to give some words of comments, less than 1 minute for this result.
Right. Decision makers. Decision makers, we should be looking as a continuum of enabling and management and good communication. I mentioned my hospital managers never come onto the ward. Their aim is cost effectiveness of the money they've been given by the government, and that's it. And they would stop things happening if it wasn't within a cost-benefit scheme. I would love to have them come to my ward and see patients who need care.
Thank you very much. Professor Bussemakers, what is your comment on this result?
Yeah, I would say I've been a decision maker, you know, I think talking about the authority, it should not be very successful to say let's decision makers have to listen better to scientists. Because, you know, of course, that's what we like, being a scientist, but we also have to think to replace ourselves in the position of a decision maker. So I would say, again, we have to contextualize and to think what are the best windows of opportunity in a special case to get the support of a decision maker, whether it's the board of a hospital or whether it's the Minister of Healthcare or the Commissioner of Healthcare in Europe. So we have to think about what is the best context to get the information in a proper way through.
Thank you very much. And then your last reflections.
Luckily, in our case, we are not the decision makers, it's the Commission. We only advise the decision makers. However, we do make some decision before we produce our opinion, so that is our internal decision making. I would say that we always try to keep abreast of whatever is emerging in new technological scientific, and as I presented in some of the examples, we're always struggling with how fast the scientific developments are and technological developments are moving. So it is just catching up game all the time for us. But luckily, we are not the decision makers as probably what we are discussing in this context.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the three people that contributed to this debate from this side and everybody in the room. I hope that this gave food for thought and set the scene for the further points that we're going to develop in the forthcoming sessions. We first now take a coffee break and we come back 10 minutes past 11 sharp so that we can adapt to the program as smoothly as possible. Big applause for our three contributors. Thank you very much.